RVs are starting to pop up almost everywhere on Longmont streets. But it's not people camping, it's people living, and now the city's trying to do something to get these homes on wheels to move along. But as Denver 7's Jason Greenough found out in 2026, having a job no longer means having a home. Millions of Americans are working full-time and sleeping in cars, vans, and parking lots. This isn't a recession story. This is a system breaking in real time, and most people have no idea how bad it's become. By 2026, the United States crossed a line economists once thought impossible. Having a job no longer protects you from homelessness. Current data shows nearly 1 in 2 unhoused adults is employed, either full-time or part-time. This isn't hidden unemployment. These are active workers without access to shelter. What makes 2026 different is permanence. Workers are no longer between places. Many have lived in vehicles, RVs, or temporary setups for 6 to 18 months while maintaining employment. This marks the birth of a new economic class. People who work, pay taxes, and contribute but remain unhoused indefinitely. Housing loss now triggers from minor disruptions. A single rent hike, medical bill, reduced shift, or childcare conflict causes displacement in under 45 days. In most metro areas, there's no cheaper unit to move into, only waiting lists or rejection. Nationally, average rent pushed past $1,900 per month, while median wages for frontline workers remain under $23 per hour, or approximately $3,700 monthly before taxes. Even perfect attendance and overtime cannot bridge that gap. The system still labels these workers as self-sufficient, disqualifying them from aid while simultaneously denying them housing. That contradiction defines the working homeless crisis of 2026. These aren't people who stopped trying. They're people who keep working despite a system that stopped working for them. In 2026, the wage-to-rent gap is no longer widening. It's fully detached. Since 2015, rents increased roughly 95 to 110% nationwide, while wages rose only 35 to 40%. The numbers no longer intersect at any realistic point for single-income households. A worker earning $22 per hour grosses about $3,800 monthly before taxes. After deductions, take-home pay often lands near $3,000. Yet qualifying rent thresholds now demand $5,700 to $6,300 monthly in documented income. This means millions of workers are mathematically barred from housing they could otherwise afford. Landlords aren't adjusting standards because demand is relentless. Corporate ownership of rental housing continues expanding with large firms prioritizing risk-free tenants over occupancy. Vacancy exists, but only for those meeting strict income ratios, typically requiring renters to earn 3 times the monthly rent. Relocation is no longer a solution. Formerly affordable regions now mirror coastal pricing. Workers attempting to move face upfront costs averaging $6,000 to $10,000, including deposits, fees, and first month's rent. Money most households simply don't have in 2026. The housing crisis isn't about laziness or spending habits. It's about a labor market producing income below the minimum threshold for shelter even at full-time hours. The system broke, not the workers. By 2026, the working homeless population is dominated by people in essential roles. Logistics workers, nursing aides, school support staff, food service supervisors, delivery drivers, retail managers, and security officers now make up a significant share of the unhoused workforce. Over 65% of new jobs created pay wages that cannot support market rent anywhere near job centers. These roles are stable on paper, but unstable in reality. Variable scheduling, capped hours at 30 to 35 per week, and inconsistent overtime make income appear unreliable to landlords, even when annual earnings are adequate. Many workers earn between $45,000 and $55,000 annually, yet still fail income verification due to fluctuating pay periods. Housing applications increasingly reject anyone without perfectly predictable income streams, regardless of total annual earnings. Commuting has become a hidden tax. Workers pushed farther from city centers spend $500 to $900 monthly on fuel, insurance, and maintenance. For many, vehicle living near work becomes the only financially rational option, saving 2 to 3 hours daily in commute time. The social contract has reversed. In 2026, full-time employment often locks workers into low-wage cycles that prevent saving, relocation, or recovery. Jobs no longer lead to stability. They trap workers just above eligibility for help and just below the cost of living, creating a permanent economic underclass. Layoffs in 2026 are no longer isolated corporate events. They're housing accelerators, ongoing restructuring in tech, logistics, healthcare administration, retail, and manufacturing continues displacing workers in waves rather than cycles. The danger isn't long-term unemployment, it's short-term income interruption. Most renters cannot absorb even 30 days without full pay. Severance packages rarely exceed 1 month, typically ranging from 2 to 4 weeks, while rent obligations continue uninterrupted. Unemployment benefits remain misaligned with housing costs. In many states, weekly benefits still cap under $550, while average weekly rent now exceeds $475 to $500. This leaves households mathematically unable to stay housed during job transitions, even when benefits are approved quickly. Families are hit hardest. Childcare costs in 2026 average $1,000 to $1,400 monthly, making reemployment slower and savings non-existent. Many families choose vehicles or informal arrangements to avoid shelter systems that disrupt schooling or employment. The defining feature of 2026 is frequency. Workers are laid off, rehired at 15 to 25% lower pay, and laid off again, resetting instability each time. Layoffs no longer end with reemployment, they end with permanent housing loss. The temporary has become permanent. What once represented a career setback now represents complete displacement as the time between stable employment and homelessness shrinks to weeks. By 2026, evictions became the primary pipeline into working homelessness. Court filings in major metro areas are now 40 to 60% higher than pre-pandemic norms, with working tenants making up a growing share of defendants. Evictions move fast. Many renters lose housing within 3 weeks of notice, leaving no time to secure alternatives. Once an eviction is filed, even if rent is later paid, it permanently damages housing access for up to 7 years. No-fault evictions have surged. Tenants are displaced for renovations, rent resets, or ownership changes, not non-payment. Workers who paid on time for years are removed overnight to raise rents 30 to 50% beyond their reach. Eviction records follow renters for up to 7 years, effectively excluding them from most housing markets. Approximately 80 to 90% of landlords now reject applicants with any eviction history, regardless of circumstances. This forces workers into vehicles, overcrowded units, or informal arrangements that never appear in official homelessness counts. In 2026, eviction is no longer a last resort. It's a routine business process, and one that quietly converts employed Americans into the working homeless class. The process takes roughly 30 to 45 days from filing to lockout, but the consequences last nearly a decade, making recovery almost impossible even with steady employment. By 2026, living in a vehicle is no longer an emergency response. It became America's unofficial housing fallback. Estimates now place over 1 million people living in cars, vans, or RVs at some point during the year, many of them fully employed. This shift didn't happen because vehicles are desirable. It happened because there's nowhere else to go. Vehicle living offers what the housing market no longer does: flexibility, no deposits, no income verification, no eviction record. For workers rejected by landlords, vehicles are the only shelter not controlled by a gatekeeper. However, this comes at a cost. Monthly vehicle expenses, including fuel, insurance, maintenance, and registration, now average $600 to $900, rivaling low-end rent from just a decade ago. What changed in 2026 is duration. People are no longer living in vehicles for weeks. They're doing it for years. Many workers structure entire routines around parking rotations, gym memberships for hygiene at $30 to $50 monthly, and overnight stealth strategies to avoid citations. Cities quietly rely on this system. Vehicle dwellers reduce shelter demand and keep people employed, yet remain invisible in official counts. But this solution is collapsing too. Enforcement rising fuel prices at $3.50 to $4.50 per gallon, and insurance hikes are making vehicle living increasingly unstable. What once functioned as a safety net is now a pressure cooker, pushing working people closer to full displacement. In 2026, the response to working homelessness is no longer neglect, it's enforcement. Hundreds of cities expanded bans on overnight parking, sleeping in vehicles, camping, and even resting in public spaces. These laws don't reduce homelessness. They shuffle it block by block. Fines for vehicle dwelling now range from $75 to $500 per citation, quickly compounding into unpayable debt. Vehicles are towed at costs of $300 to $600, licenses suspended, and workers lose the very transportation they need to stay employed. This creates a feedback loop where enforcement directly causes job loss. What makes 2026 different is coordination. Cities increasingly share data between parking enforcement, police, and code compliance. Workers are tracked, ticketed, and forced to move repeatedly, burning fuel, time, and money. Some cities now require proof of housing for vehicle registration renewals, quietly targeting the unhoused workforce. These policies don't target addiction or crime. They target people who are still working because they're easier to penalize. The result is a system where survival itself becomes illegal. Instead of investing in sanctioned parking, low-cost housing, or infrastructure, cities choose enforcement because it's cheaper short-term, costing approximately $2,000 to $5,000 per person annually. But long-term, it destabilizes the workforce that keeps local economies running. In 2026, criminalization replaced policy, and workers are paying the price with their stability, employment, and dignity. By 2026, shelters are no longer a viable option for most working homeless individuals, not because of stigma, but because shelters conflict with employment. Curfews, early check-ins by 7 to 8 hours p.m., shared sleeping arrangements, and mandatory daytime exits make holding a full-time job nearly impossible. Many shelters still require residents to vacate by 6 to 7 a.m., regardless of night shifts or long commutes. Storage limitations mean workers risk losing tools, uniforms, or electronics essential for their jobs. Missed curfews often result in losing a bed entirely. Capacity is another barrier. Urban shelters operate at 90 to 100% occupancy most nights, with wait lists stretching weeks or months. Families and single adults are frequently separated, forcing people to choose between staying together or accessing shelter. Safety concerns are also real. Workers with early shifts avoid shelters due to theft, sleep disruption, and conflict. For many, sleeping in a car, even illegally, offers more rest and control than a crowded facility with 20 to 50 people per room. As a result, shelters increasingly serve only the most desperate cases, while the working homeless bypass the system entirely. This creates a false narrative that shelters are available when they are functionally unusable for employed people. In 2026, shelters are no longer stepping stones back to stability. They're dead ends for anyone trying to stay employed while maintaining health and dignity. The most disturbing trend of 2026 is the growth of working homeless families. Parents with jobs are living in cars, motel, or overcrowded arrangements while trying to keep children in school and routines intact. School districts estimate that 1 in 30 students now experiences housing instability during the academic year. Many families hide homelessness to avoid child welfare involvement, skipping services entirely to stay together. Families face unique barriers. A single missed paycheck can collapse childcare arrangements costing $100 or more monthly. Once childcare is lost, employment becomes fragile, accelerating displacement. Vehicle living with children requires constant movement to avoid detection. Parents plan nights around safety, lighting, and enforcement zones. Sleep deprivation is common, affecting both children's education and parents' job performance. Studies show children experiencing housing instability score 15 to 20% lower on standardized tests. Motel offer temporary relief but drain income fast. Weekly rates often exceed $400 to $600, consuming entire paychecks without building stability. Once savings are gone, families fall into deeper precarity. In 2026, family homelessness is no longer visible on sidewalks. It's hidden in parking lots, school drop-offs, and early morning commutes. These families are not disconnected from society. They're working nonstop to avoid falling completely out of it. Approximately 250,000 to 300,000 children now experience vehicle-based homelessness annually, a number that continues rising without intervention. Healthcare became one of the fastest-growing triggers of working homelessness in 2026. Even insured workers face deductibles, co-pays, and unpaid time off that quickly destroy financial stability. The average deductible now exceeds $1,700. While many workers cannot cover a $500 emergency expense, a single injury or illness can cause missed shifts, reduced hours, or job loss, instantly affecting housing. Medical emergencies now rank among the top 3 causes of housing displacement. Chronic conditions are especially devastating. Workers managing diabetes, autoimmune diseases, or mental health conditions face recurring costs of $200 to $500 monthly and inconsistent productivity, making housing approval harder and layoffs more likely. Medical debt also damages credit scores by 50 to 100 points, further restricting housing access. Landlords increasingly screen for medical collections, treating illness as financial risk. Approximately 60% of landlords now reject applicants with medical debt over $2,000. For vehicle dwellers, healthcare becomes harder to manage. Refrigeration for medication, hygiene needs, and rest are compromised, worsening conditions and increasing costs in a vicious cycle. In 2026, healthcare doesn't just threaten health, it threatens shelter. The system punishes workers for getting sick, completing the final link in the chain from employment to homelessness. Medical bills over $1,000 now precipitate housing loss in approximately 30 to 45 days for workers living paycheck to paycheck, making illness itself a pathway to displacement. By 2026, working homelessness is no longer concentrated in major cities. Rural and small-town America is collapsing quietly without shelters, services, or media attention. Jobs still exist, but housing does not. Small towns lost affordable rentals as single-family homes were converted into short-term rentals or sold to investors. What remains is often outdated, unsafe, or priced far beyond local wages. In many counties, there are fewer than 10 available rentals at any given time. Wages in rural areas trail cities by 20 to 35%, while rent gaps have narrowed to just 10 to 15% difference. This means workers earn less, but pay nearly the same for housing. Once displaced, options disappear quickly. Shelters are often 50 to 100 meters away, making access impossible without reliable transportation. Vehicle living becomes the default, but parking options are limited. Small towns enforce ordinances more aggressively because displacement is visible and politically sensitive. Workers are forced to move repeatedly, even while employed locally. Rural homelessness stays hidden because it lacks encampments. It shows up as couch surfing, abandoned properties, vehicles on back roads, and families doubling up until they can't anymore. Rural counties now report 25 to 40% increases in vehicle dwelling citations. In 2026, rural America is not insulated from the crisis. It's less equipped to survive it, with services concentrated 1 to 2 hours away from those who need them most. In 2026, housing insecurity became an unspoken labor control mechanism. Desperate workers accept lower wages, unstable schedules, and poor conditions because they cannot risk job loss while unhoused. When workers live paycheck to paycheck or vehicle to vehicle, they're less likely to organize, negotiate, or leave. Employers gain flexibility while workers absorb the risk. This dynamic keeps wages suppressed even as productivity rises by 15 to 20% annually. Some industries rely heavily on this instability. Logistics, retail, hospitality, and caregiving roles now operate with constant turnover rates of 60 to 80% annually, knowing there's always another displaced worker ready to replace the last. Housing instability also shifts costs away from employers. Workers absorb transportation, rest, healthcare, and recovery expenses themselves. Burnout becomes normalized while benefits remain minimal. Only 35 to 40% of frontline workers now receive employer-sponsored health insurance. In effect, the economy is subsidized by homelessness. Workers continue producing value while living in conditions once considered unacceptable. This isn't conspiracy, it's incentive alignment. In 2026, the system does not correct this imbalance because instability keeps labor cheap and compliant. The working homeless are not an accident. They're a predictable outcome of how incentives now function. Employers save an estimated $15,000 to $25,000 per worker annually by avoiding raises that would enable housing stability, creating a financial incentive to maintain the status quo. By 2026, the narrative that homelessness results from poor decisions is mathematically indefensible. Data shows the majority of working homeless individuals previously lived stable, conventional lives, jobs, leases, routines. Approximately 70 to 75% had no prior homelessness experience. What changed was not behavior, it was cost. Rent increases of $200 to $400 monthly. Healthcare bills averaging $2,500 to $3,000. Layoffs and enforcement stacked faster than wages could respond. Personal responsibility cannot overcome structural gaps measured in thousands of dollars per month. Many displaced workers followed every rule. They worked full-time, avoided debt, paid taxes, and lived modestly. Still, they were priced out. This reality became too widespread to ignore. The persistence of the myth serves a purpose. It allows systems to avoid accountability by individualizing failure. But in 2026, failure is no longer individual. It's statistically normal. When millions experience the same outcome through different paths, the cause is systemic. The working homeless crisis is not about choices. It's about constraints that exceed individual control by margins of $500 to $1,500 monthly. This shift matters because blame determines policy. As long as society mislabels this crisis, solutions will remain misdirected. The data now shows 85 to 90% of working homeless individuals made financially responsible decisions decisions before displacement. The problem isn't character, it's a cost structure that mathematically excludes workers from housing, regardless of behavior or work ethic. In 2026, the last remaining escape route, RV and van living, is collapsing. Rising fuel costs, insurance premiums, registration fees, and maintenance expenses turned mobile living into a financial trap. Fuel alone now averages $300 to $500 monthly for workers commuting or rotating parking locations. Insurance rates climbed sharply, increasing 40 to 60% since 2023, especially for older vehicles and full-time use classifications. Maintenance costs are unavoidable. Repairs that once cost $300 to $500 now cost $1,500 to $3,000. And many vehicle dwellers delay fixes until breakdowns occur, leading to job loss and total displacement. Financing is also tightening. Lenders increasingly refuse loans for RVs or vans older than 10 to 15 years, pushing people into cash-only purchases with no safety net. Interest rates on approved RV loans now range from 8 to 12%. What once offered autonomy now offers risk. A single mechanical failure costing $2,000 to $5,000 can instantly turn housing loss into complete homelessness. In 2026, even living on wheels is no longer affordable for many workers. The system is closing exits faster than people can adapt. Registration fees increased 25 to 35% in most states, adding another $200 to $400 annually to already strained budgets. The average total cost of RV living now exceeds $200 to $1,600 monthly when all expenses are included, approaching the cost of traditional rent without any of the stability. Despite record numbers exceeding 1.5 million working homeless individuals, the U.S. enters 2026 without a coordinated national response to working homelessness. Federal programs still assume homelessness equals unemployment, addiction, or crisis, not employment. Housing assistance remains fragmented, slow, and mismatched to real needs. Income thresholds disqualify workers who earn too much to qualify for help, typically above $2,500 monthly, but too little to rent. States and cities are left to improvise. Some experiment with temporary parking zones or motel vouchers, but funding is inconsistent and politically fragile. Most initiatives expire before stability is reached, typically within 6 to 12 months. The result is policy whiplash. Workers move from city to city chasing legality rather than opportunity, spending $500 to $1,000 on each relocation attempt. Federal housing assistance wait lists now average 2 to 5 years in major cities, far too long for workers in immediate crisis. Only 15 to 20% of eligible households actually receive assistance due to funding limitations. In 2026, the absence of a plan is itself a policy choice. Without intervention, working homelessness becomes normalized, not solved. Congressional proposals addressing the crisis receive less than 30% support, leaving workers without federal protection or resources. The gap between need and response continues widening as approximately 200,000 to 250,000 additional workers enter homelessness annually without coordinated support systems. By 2026, the working homeless crisis is no longer a warning, it's a preview. If wages, housing, healthcare, and enforcement continue on their current path, this population will not shrink. It will grow by 15 to 25% annually. Future workers will plan lives around instability, vehicles instead of leases, cash instead of savings, mobility instead of roots. Housing will become conditional, temporary, and transactional. Projections show 2 to 3 million working homeless individuals by 2028 without policy intervention. This reshapes society. Communities lose cohesion. Children grow up without permanence with developmental impacts lasting 10 to 20 years. Workers burn out faster and recover less, reducing productivity by 20 to 30%. The danger is normalization. Once instability becomes expected, urgency disappears. Crisis turns into background noise. Public support for intervention drops below 40% when homelessness is perceived as permanent. In 2026, the question is no longer how did this happen, it's how far it will be allowed to go. Current trajectories suggest 1 in 20 workers will experience homelessness within 5 years. The working homeless population doubled between 2022 and 2026, and without structural change, it will double again by 2030. This isn't speculation, it's mathematics based on wage growth of 2 to 3% against rent, increases of 8 to 12% annually, a gap that cannot close without intervention. When work can't buy shelter, something is fundamentally broken. Their golden years are gone. With rising rent and inflation, more senior citizens here in Central Florida say they are struggling just to keep a roof over their heads. And as West News' David Jones tells us, the sun is setting for some Florida retirees. Right now in Florida, it is becoming illegal to exist if you're poor, not to steal, not to hurt anyone, to sleep, to rest, to survive in your own vehicle.